Gusto ko lamang pong ipaalam sa lahat na ang ating dating Pangulo ay siya po ay nagtanggol ng ating soberenya. Pangulo, ito pong sunod-sunod na araw, lumalabas po ang mga mapaggawa ng chismis patungkol po sa mga Pangulo daw na nagtraidor sa inang bayan. Una po dyan, gumawa po ang ating kasama ni Senator Jinggoy Estrada ng pagtatanggol sa kanyang ama. Sumunod din po, pinagtanggol din po ni dating Pangulo Gloria Macapagal Arroyo ang kanyang sarili patungkol po dito. Ngayon naman po ay binabakbakan ang dating Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte. Nais ko lamang pong ipaalam na kahit kailan, hindi po nagkaroon ng pag-uusap ang bansang Chino at ang Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte patungkol po sa pag-aalis ng MV Sierra Madre dyan sa Ayungin Shoal. Ito po ay pinatunayan din ng ating dating kalihim na si Miguel Dea patungkol po rito. Ginoong Pangulo, gusto ko lamang pong ipaalam sa lahat na ang ating pong dating Pangulo ay master sa geopolitics at hindi po siya kailanman ibebenta ang Pilipinas. At katunayan, sa panahon po niya, nagkaroon tayong ng napakaraming assets po natin sa Armed Forces of the Philippines. Maging himpapawid, karagatan, katihan. Sa panahon po niya, nagkaroon ng maraming assets ang Coast Guard. Gusto ko lamang pong ipaalam sa lahat na ang ating dating Pangulo ay siya po ay nagtanggol ng ating soberenya. Hindi po kailanman siya magiging traidor. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat. Yes, Deputy Minority Leader.
Mr. President, if I may, meron din po akong actually kaugnay na manifestasyon tungkol sa Philippine Coast Guard, aided by some slides, Mr. President, if I may be allowed.
Yes, please proceed. Is this an interjection or a interpolation, a form of interpolation?
It's not an interpellation, Mr. President. It's an interjection because my manifestation is exactly related to the topic. That part of the topic, kaugnay po ng Philippine Coast Guard, Mr. President, tulad ng minanifest ngayon lamang ng good gentleman from
Before we allow you-
yesterday, dulang pagtawanan at bastusin sa social media nila ang ating mga magigiting na Coast Guard at mangingisda. Mr. President, dear colleagues, on top of accompanying resupply missions and patrolling our waters, our Philippine Coast Guard has now taken on the responsibility of regularly documenting and exposing China's cruelty at sea. Tapos, ganun-ganun na lang sila maliitin ng Chinese Coast Guard, ganun-ganun na lang sila pagpiestahan sa social media ng mga pro-Beijing propagandists. Hindi po yan katanggap-tanggap. Tama nga yata ang sabi nila, masyadong maraming nakakampante dito sa ating duyan ng mga magiting. So today, we will show some videos and images from the Philippine Coast Guard.
Hindi tayo pabalikin na. Hindi ko na-videoan yung una. Wala yung isa.
Saktong halos na isang taon ang nakararaan. Noong August 2022, a Chinese Coast Guard crew member removed the cover of its 70mm naval gun and aimed it at a Philippine Coast Guard ship that was on its way to Ayungin Shoal. This is considered a threatening move.
Hindi, alam niyo kasi na tumitingin tayo sa kanya.
Okay lang yan. Tinakpan lang tayo. Tatanggal yun.
February naman, this year, China shined a military-grade laser at a Philippine Coast Guard ship, temporarily blinding our crew on board. Kung tao itong mga barko, tila tinutukan ng baril ng isang Chino ang isang Pilipino. At nito na nga, August 5, ang pinakahuling insidente sa Ayungin. Ang pinakahuling insidente ng panlalamang at panlalait sa ating mga bantay dagat. Para lang maharang ang simpleng routine supply mission ng mga maliliit na bangka tungo sa BRP Sierra Madre. Mga kababayan, Hindi po itong simpleng parang hinarang tayo sa daan at pagkatapos ay umurong ang mga Pilipinong bangka. Parang ito kasi ang lumalabas sa usap-usapan, para bang simpleng nagkasalubong at nagkaurungan. Hindi po. Sa totoo lang po, dear colleagues, at sa ating mga kababayang nanunood po ngayon, inalmusal po ng mga Coast Guard ang pambabastos ng China. 6:30 pa lang ng umaga, nang haharas na po ang China. Bandang 8:00, 3 na ang barko na umaaligid sa PCG at sa supply boat. At Mr. President, dear colleagues, again, hindi ito bastang sinusundan lang. Ang nangyayari po dito ay kinakat ng China ang PCG escort ng supply boat natin. Ginagawa po nilang expressway ang karagatan. Hinabol nila ng hinabol at kalaunan nakat na ang maliit na supply vessel. At ito na ang sinasabi nating dangerous maneuver. Alam naman nating kapag ang mga barko ay tumigil, hindi yan bastang titigil na parang jeep sa kanto pag sumigaw ka ng para. Dito, bandang 9:00, makikita nyo ang gitgitan kung gaano kalapit sa aksidente ang ating mga bantay dagat dahil sa tuloy-tuloy na habulan. At dear colleagues, hindi tumigil ang habulan na yan hanggang tanghali. Ito na ring pangunguyog ng China ang tinanghalian ng ating mga Coast Guard. At inabot pa sila ng 4:00 ng hapon sa kakaiwas sa kapahamakan. Dear colleagues, nakita nyo naman, inabot ng maghapon ang habulan at panliligalig na ito ng Beijing sa isang simpleng supply mission. At syempre, hindi na kontento ang China sa pambobomba at pang-aabala sa atin sa karagatan. Dinala nila yung pangkukuyog na yan sa social media. Pagkatapos mailabas sa publiko ang walang awang pagbomba ng tubig ng China sa ating napakaliit na barko, agad ding nagpakita ang China ng sarili niyang video kung saan pinalalabas niya na hindi naman natamaan ang ating barko. After our Philippine Coast Guard revealed China's attack, the Chinese Coast Guard immediately countered us, stating that they exercised, quote, rational restraint throughout the process, close quote. As if on cue, China's national language English newspaper, Global Times, then reported that the, quote, Chinese Coast Guard behavior was based on law, close quote, and that the Philippine vessels, quote, illegally sailed into waters, close quote. Another China state-owned network, CTGN, also reported that China Coast Guard, quote, expelled Philippine vessels in territorial waters, close quote, and that Philippine Navy vessels, quote, challenged China's sovereignty, close quote. Binabaluktot nila ang katotohanan. Pinamamukha nila na tayo pa ang masama. Worse, these false narratives are echoed by some of our fellow Filipinos. This urged the PCG spokesperson, Commodore J. Tariela, to tweet a strongly worded statement about how Filipinos who defend or make excuses for China's aggressive behavior should be considered unpatriotic traitors. I couldn't agree more with Commodore Tariela. Traidor, ang sino mang kumakampi sa China sa panahong binabastos at inaalipusta niya ang soberanya at dignidad ng Pilipinas. Mr. President, these public information efforts of the PCG have been an essential element in asserting our lawful claims in the West Philippine Sea. But as soon as the PCG exposes China's unlawful activities to the world, as soon as its officials speak boldly about China's harassment in the West Philippine Sea, there would be a deluge of mis- and disinformation circling around social media, directly targeting the Philippine Coast Guard and undermining efforts by the Philippines to assert our sovereignty over our maritime zones. As if orchestrated and copying from the same script, pro-Beijing propagandists would relentlessly attack the PCG and its personnel. Keso CIA agent daw sila o di kaya'y mouthpiece ng Amerika. Dear colleagues, the PCG is our first line of defense for our nation's maritime territory, including strategic vital areas such as the West Philippine Sea, Benham Rise, the Sulu Sea, and the Luzon Strait, as well as the rest of the country's exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. We cannot allow China-backed fake news to diminish and damage the work that our Coast Guard has been doing. Our Coast Guard, pursuant to RA number 9993, has had the mandate to enforce Philippine law in accordance with all relevant maritime international conventions, treaties, or instruments, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, within the maritime jurisdiction of the Philippines. Our Coast Guard is responsible for overall maritime governance, as it is in charge of maritime safety, maritime environmental protection, and maritime security. Despite this colossal obligation, despite being tasked to maintain maritime domain awareness across the width and breadth of the country's maritime zones, since 2009, the PCG has been receiving only a measly 10 million pesos for its intelligence fund, forcing it to rely solely on human intelligence, or HUMINT. However, in order to sustain the PCG's presence in the West Philippine Sea, we need more signals intelligence, SIGINT technologies that could help them efficiently and effectively exercise their mandate. I also must stress that these 10 million pesos are not only for the PCG's duties over the West Philippine Sea, but for the entire coastal areas and waters of the Philippines. Sa napakaraming banta na nararanasan ng Coast Guard, hindi ba dapat na mas malaki naman sa 10 milyon ang maibigay sa kanila? Mr. President, considering the current vulnerabilities of our Coast Guard, I also filed proposed Senate Resolution 744 to call for an inquiry in aid of legislation into further capacitating and empowering the Philippine Coast Guard to enable it to carry out its primary mission of enforcing Philippine law and upholding national sovereignty within the country's maritime zones, particularly the West Philippine Sea. Similar to how this august chamber unanimously supported Senate Resolution 718 condemning Chinese harassment, transcending politics and partisanship, I hope that the entire Senate can also stand firmly behind our Philippine Coast Guard. At the budget process, I encourage all of us to support the increase of the PCG's Intel funds. This is where confidential and intelligence funds should be allocated. This is where our money should go. The PCG actually is facing a clear and present danger. Ang organisasyon, tulad ng PCG, ang dapat binibigyan ng mga confidential at intelligence funds. Hindi yung mga ahensyang sibilyan na wala namang kinakaharap na pagbabanta at panganib. If we could further strengthen the men and women of our Coast Guard, arm them with advanced technological infrastructure and equipment, we can more effectively hold China accountable for her hostile, aggressive, and illegal actions in the West Philippine Sea. We can better fight China's lies, propaganda, and manipulation. We can make a stronger case against China's threats and intimidation before various international fora, potentially increasing our allies in the region and across the world. Dear colleagues, Mr. President, the Chinese government has continuously militarized portions of the West Philippine Sea by building and fortifying artificial islands in the region, equipping them with military installations such as runways, radar systems, and naval facilities, allowing its vessels to operate within our EEZ on a near constant basis. This has led to an unprecedented challenge to the Philippine Coast Guard's primary mission of enforcing Philippine law, maintaining the country's sovereignty, and upholding vital national interests in the West Philippine Sea. Now, it has become clear that China has her eye on Ayungin Shoal. The water cannons, the military laser, the removal of a naval gun cover, all these severe provocations were against Philippine vessels making their way to Ayungin. China is actively blocking these missions because she does not want any further reinforcement to our most defiant sovereign marker in the West Philippine Sea, the BRP Sierra Madre. Let us not forget, most of the officers there, dinadialysis ngayon. O kaya may sakit sa bato dahil hindi na nga makakain ng maayos, wala pang desalinator. Tapos haharangin pa ng China ang supply. After the events of August 5, I believe we can shore up even more support for our Philippine Coast Guard, whether on the ground or on social media, so we can seriously defend the Sierra Madre, Ayungin, and the rest of our territories. Hindi man ang China, handa man ang China na gawin ang lahat para manggulo sa West Philippine Sea. At subukan man nila ang lahat ng pangungutya at pang-aapi sa social media. Lalo lang nila tayong pinagkakaisa bilang mga tunay na Pilipino. Haharapin natin sila ng makatao at diplomatiko at ipapakita natin sa mundo muli at muli pa na malulutas natin ang sigalot na ito sa paraang mapayapa at makatarungan. Salamat po, Mr. President.